Okay, today's lesson is going to be on multiplying integers. So what I need you to do is open up your book to page 234. Multiplying and dividing integers is much easier than adding and subtracting integers. The rules of multiplying and dividing integers are very similar to what you would do normally when multiplying and dividing integers on the front end. But on the back end, you then have to worry about what you're going to do with the signs. But the rules for multiplying and dividing integers are almost identical. So when multiplying integers, your book does a nice job of putting what you do with different signs in purple here, but I've always liked this. So in your work zone, if you could write this, the rules of multiplying integers. When you multiply a positive times a positive, your answer is going to be positive. When you multiply a positive times a negative, your answer is going to be negative. When you multiply a negative times a positive, your answer is going to be negative. And when you multiply a negative times a negative, your answer is going to be positive. It's essentially when your signs are the same, answer is positive. Signs are different, answer is negative. It's almost like grammar. When you have a double negative in grammar, it means the opposite of what you mean it to mean. I don't have none. I don't have none means that you have some. Okay? It's the same thing in integers. Okay? When you have a negative and a negative, it is a positive. And so in positive times a positive is a positive. That's how it's always been. You also need to, so make sure that you have that copied down. And if you didn't have this copied down, you should have paused your video or rewind your video to make sure that you have this copied in your workbook, okay? And if you come tomorrow, I'm going to make sure that that is written down. The commutative property of multiplication, we've talked about this before. The commutative property of multiplication means, and you have the commutative property of addition or multiplication, that just means that you can commute the order. The order that you add or multiply does not matter. So when you have multiple numbers that you're multiplying in a set, so two meaning 3 or 4 numbers, you can change around that order. And that's going to become important because if you have a negative times a negative or a positive times a positive, if you have a negative times a positive times a negative, you can move those negatives together and then multiply them, get a positive, and then you can multiply that times the positive so that you end up with positive. It just makes it a lot easier when you're doing your multiplication. So that is really going to become important. Okay, so when multiplying integers, what you essentially are going to be doing is, like I said, you're going to multiply like you would typically multiply. So in this example 1, you have 3 times negative 5. 3 times 5 is 15. Because the signs are different, your answer is negative. Here, you have negative 6 times 8. You take 6 times 8, which is 48. Because you have a negative times a positive, signs are different, the answer is going to be negative. So look at example A. Example A is 9 times a negative 2. You take 9 times 2, ignore the signs at first. 9 times 2 is 18. Because you have a positive times a negative, your answer is going to be a negative. Okay? Now you do B. Pause your video and you do B. Negative 7 times 4, you ignore the negative 7, so 7 times 4 is 28. Because they're both negative, or because one is negative and one is positive, they're both different signs, your answer then is going to be a negative 28. Okay? All right. If you got those right, move on. If you didn't, go back and please rewatch the video. Now we're going to multiply integers with the same sign. So again, if the integers are multiplied by the same sign, your answer is going to be positive. So a positive times a positive, as it's always been since 3rd or 4th grade when you started to learn to multiply. 2 times 6 is 12. 3 times 4 is 12. 5 times 5 is 25. Okay? When the difference now is when you have a negative times a negative. You're going to ignore those signs and say 10 times 6, which is still 60. But because they're both negative, your answer is still going to remain positive. Okay? So turn the page, please, to page 235. Okay. Come on, come on, come on. I can't seem to get my, let's go. Okay, so we're gonna look at example 3. Well, my smartboard is acting funny. Example number 3. So if you look at example number 3, you'll go like negative 11 times a negative 9. To this side. A negative 11 times a negative 9. You look at that and you say, okay, 11 times 9 is 99. Because they're both negative, your answer is positive. Now in this example, this is an interesting example because here you have an exponent. And you are going to have exponents on your assignment. So it's important that you know how to use those, okay? So you have a negative 4 squared. Now that squared means it's a negative 4 times a negative 4, okay? So you still would multiply 4 times 4, which is 16. They're both negative, so your answer is positive. We kind of talked about that in 3rd and 4th hour the other day when we were doing cubed roots, or square roots. Number 5, example 5 now is different because it has 3 numbers. So the order that you multiply those 3 numbers does not matter because of the commutative property. So you can do it in any order that you want. Okay, so it has a negative 3 times a negative 4 times a negative 2. So if you do a negative 3 times a negative 4, negative 3 times negative 4, you take 3 times 4, that's 12. They're both negative, so your answer is a positive. Then you got to multiply that times a negative 2. 12 times 2 is 24. And because that's a negative and that's a positive, the signs are different this time, so our answer is going to be a negative 24. Okay? All right, I would like you to do examples C and D. I think it's, yep, just, oops, I don't know what it is. C, D, and E. So you pause your video. I'm going to erase my board. You pause your video, and you do examples C, D, and E. And then we'll go over those. Okay, examples C, D, and E. C is a negative 12 times a negative 4. So you would just multiply 12 times 4. So 12 times 4 is 48. Because it's a negative times a negative, your answer would be positive. Negative 5 squared means a negative 5 times a negative 5. You ignore the signs and just multiply 5 times 5. 5 times 5 is 25. Because they're both negative, our answer is going to stay positive, and it's just going to be 25. With these 3 numbers, you multiply. Now, you can multiply them in any order you want. If you want to commute the order or change the order, you can if you would like to, if that would help you. So if you do 7 times 5, which is, or well, a negative 7 times a negative 5, which is 35, because they're both negative, oops, your answer is going to be positive. And then multiply that times a negative 3. Now, I don't want you using calculators in this chapter because of that negative button. I need you to stay away from that negative button. So if you need to, do 35 times 3. 5 times 3 is 15, carry your 1. 3 times 3 is 9, plus 1 is 10. So your answer is 105. But this is a negative times a positive. So it's a negative 105. If you got C, D, and E right, you can move on. If you didn't, I need you to go back and rewatch that video because I need to make sure that you have an understanding of what you did wrong, okay, before we move on. So I really need you to go back and watch the video. If you got them right, you can move on to the next page. So I need you to turn to page 236, and we will go on to the word problem. I can get my board to move up. Up. Example 6. Example 6 talks about a submarine, and it says that a submarine is diving from the surface of the water at a rate of 90 feet per minute. What's the depth of the submarine after 7 minutes? It says the submarine descends 90 feet per minute. After 7 minutes, the vessel will be at 7 times a negative 90. So because it's 7 minutes times 90 feet going down 90 feet per minute, so it's negative 90 times 7, which is a negative 630 feet. So it will just descend, it says 630 feet below the surface. So why don't you do F, and then we'll see if you do F right. Pause your video and you do F. All right, so for F, it says Mr. Simon's Bank automatically deducts a $4 monthly maintenance fee from his savings account. Write a multiplication expression to represent the maintenance fees for 1 year. Then find the product and explain its meaning. Okay, so the first thing you need to know is how many months are in a year. So you should know that there are 12 months in a year. So that's 12, okay? And if they deduct a $4 monthly maintenance fee, that would be the integer, which would be a -4. So you would take 12 times a -4. And then you would have to multiply 12 times a -4, which is, so take 12 times 4, which is 48. Because it's negative times a positive, the answer would be a -48. And what would our label be? It would be dollars. A -$48. Okay. And then what's its meaning? They will deduct -$48. I would write will be deducted from his account. That would be a good way to explain it. Okay. All right, for tomorrow, when you come back, what I'd like you to do, or for the next class, what I'd like you to do is to complete the guided practice numbers 1 through 5, and then rate yourself when you come back. And then we will move forward. Thank you so much.